Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make some chicken noodle soup, make up some grilled cheeses using our leftover sourdough bread from last night, and we're going to whip up some sourdough gingerbread scones with a little bit of a vanilla frosting kind of drizzle over it. So let's start by working on the base of our gingerbread scones. I do have my chicken in a pot right here. So I've got 2 big split breasts and then 4 chicken thighs, all with skin on, cooking in here in some hot water with a little bit of salt, just because that would take forever if we had to put on there. So I already started that so we can get to making the bones of the soup. But let's start with our gingerbread. We are gonna add in 2 1/4 cups of flour. We're gonna make our dry base and then we'll cut our butter into it. So 2 1/4 cups of flour. Okay. And then we're going to do a 1/2 cup of brown sugar. You can even use dark brown sugar for even more of that molasses flavor, but I'm just going to kind of stick with the regular brown sugar because that's what I have. But you need just a 1/2 cup. We're going to pound it in or pack it in. And then we're going to add in our spices and salt and baking powder. So we're going to add in a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And a 1/2 teaspoon of cloves. And then we're going to do a teaspoon of ground ginger. And 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. So we've got some nice, delicious spices in here. So 1, 2. And then we're going to do a 1.5 tablespoons of baking powder. So I realized I didn't grab my baking powder, so let me grab this right here. Baking soda, here's baking powder. So we want a 1.5 tablespoons of baking powder or 4.5 teaspoons. So 1, and then here's a 1/2 tablespoon. 2. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take my pastry cutter here and I'm going to give this all a good mix, kind of bring all those spices mixed around, get that brown sugar and everything kind of tossed up together. And then we're going to cut a 1/2 cup of butter into our mixture here to make the flaky layers of our scone. I'm going to give it a toss. You can already smell that nice kind of gingerbread smell to it. Okay. And then you want to use 1 stick of cold butter, so a 1/2 cup of cold butter, and make sure you just take it right out of the fridge and cut it up in there. You don't want it to be warm. That way you can cut it into the base pretty easily. You can also like freeze a stick and grate it into it, or use your food processor to get it nice and fine, kind of incorporate. But I just like using my pastry cutter, kind of like the good old-fashioned way. It doesn't take much work. I'm going to cut it down kind of in 4ths and cut it through here. That way I don't have super huge chunks to start with, which just makes it a little bit easier. Do a little bit of the work. And then we're going to cut our butter into our flour until we have no pieces of butter bigger than a pea. Because you don't want them too big or you're going to have kind of like a butter pocket in your mix. I'm going to kind of coat them up first with a little bit of our mixture. That way they don't just stick in my blades. And we're going to just cut this in here using my pastry cutter, which is essentially like 5 knives. And it just kind of cuts it up into smaller pieces.
You got a question? How were the steaks last night?
Oh, they were wonderful and delicious. My kids are always so happy when it's steak night, but I only ever buy steaks when they're on sale. because, you know, they're a pretty penny. But we got a great deal on them this week. But everyone was very happy. That's a meal that everyone truly loves. They just absolutely love steaks. So it was nice, and they were so big. Here, let me grab my knife again, and I'm just gonna clear out my blades here with my knife, get any chunks of butter that is stuck in there, and then we'll cut it up some more. And then we'll work on our liquid mixture, and then we'll kind of press and fold, mix and press and fold the two together. And again, we'll just kind of cut this up, and it really doesn't take too long. Like, you know, you can always do it in the food processor, but I feel like by the time you haul out your food processor and get it up and ready, you could have this cut in there. It's not too much work. Okay, we're just about there. And then we're gonna work on our wet mixture, which is gonna use our sourdough discard, eggs, cream, molasses, and vanilla. And we'll mix those together, and then we'll add them into our dry mixture. Okay. There. Just gonna again cut out any bits of butter that are stuck because we don't want to lose any. And we're done with our dry mixture. And now we're going to work on our wet mixture. So again, for this, we're going to use a 1/2 cup of our sourdough discard. Put this in here. Give it a good little scrape around. And then we're going to add in a 1/4 cup of molasses. So molasses is kind of a pretty important thing to get that deeper color as well as that rich flavor for a gingerbread. And I feel like this is the brand of molasses that has been around forever. I remember this always being in my, like the cupboard growing up. But we're going to use a 1/4 cup of molasses, which will add also kind of a nice sweetness to the scone as well. And then 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. One, 2. And we're going to do 2 tablespoons of cream, and then finally our egg. One and 2. And then 1 egg, and then we're going to mix these together and get all of the liquid ingredients kind of incorporated in one base, and then we'll add them to our dry ingredients. And this will be our gingerbread scone. Then we'll do our press and folds to shape it together, just like you would a biscuit. In there, but you can see how the molasses just gives us a lovely, rich, dark color to it.
You have a question? Do you ever bake cakes for like birthday parties or weddings?
Yes, I bake cakes for like all of my kids for like family things. Next week we actually have a lot of birthdays in our family, so I'm going to be baking a couple cakes next week for family members. And my kids always get to pick out like a crazy themed cake, and I always try to do something like fun and cool with it. So like Teddy had like a squid cake for his birthday, and but I always do that because my kids kind of love it. And that's really like the only time I did. I have made a wedding cake before for a friend, but most of the time I just do stuff for family. I'm gonna grab a fork here, and we're gonna give this a nice kind of toss together for it. But you know, the thing is like I'm just not a huge cake person, so you know we rarely ever just eat cake in and of itself, or even cupcakes. Most of the time, like we like muffins, but we're more of like a cookie, brownie type kind of dessert family here. So you're gonna just toss it until you've got these kind of, a nice kind of dry shag forming. And then we're gonna press and fold it out. But don't mix it. That will give you a stiff scone. Okay, so it might look really dry and crumbly right now, but that is what we want. That is gonna give us the flaky layers. What we're gonna do is you're gonna kind of press everything down, and then I just kind of fold it all on top of each other, and we press it down again. So this is called press and fold. And every time you press down, you're creating a flaky layer in your scone. Same thing with my pie crusts. This is how I do my, like, get that nice flaky layers. Because I do an all butter pie crust because it's so good. And then once you've kind of got this kind of cohesive dough base for it, then we'll shape it into 2 pucks. Because I like to make more mini scones versus a giant one. So it looks like we are pretty much there. Okay, so I'm going to try to divide this dough as evenly as possible. And then you just, again, don't knead it, but just kind of press it into a little puck or a disc. And then we'll get this one. There we go. Then I'm going to wash my hands, and then we'll transfer these, we'll cut them and get them in the oven to bake up. These will have all that rich kind of lovely gingerbread flavor to it. It will be just fantastic. Okay, I'm going to just slide my little pastry cutter underneath them, and we'll transfer them onto the parchment paper. It's much easier to do it this way than to try to press them, fold them on the parchment paper, because you don't want them to, you don't want a whole bunch of crumbs everywhere. And then we're going to cut these each one into 8 pieces. And once you have it cut, you are going to move them out so that they have a little space to breathe and bake, because these do grow in size. They'll pop up with their flaky layers. So you don't want them to be touching each other, or they'll be too doughy when you kind of cook them up. So just slide them out just like that. And we'll do this right over here with this one as well. And this is kind of why, if you don't use cold butter, you're not going to get that flaky layer the way you want it. You'll end up getting it it will just be too soft of a dough. I'll slide these guys out. Here. And let me just bring that one in on the edge. And then we're going to brush with a little bit of cream and sprinkle with a little bit of brown sugar. Let me grab a small bowl. And you need less than a tablespoon of cream. This is just going to give it a nice little crust on the top. We use molasses and brown sugar and some darker spices. But if you have a lighter colored scone, the cream will also help give it a nice kind of golden brown color to it. So we're just gonna kind of blot the top of each scone. It also prevents the top from drying out too much. Because I feel like that's kind of, these scones are flaky, wonderful, but they're not like crunchy or hard. I feel like scones a lot of times get overcooked, or they like are kneaded so they have a really tough dough. These will be light and fluffy and delicious with those kind of layers on it, but you'll still have that nice kind of firmness on the outside without getting too tough. Okay. So we've blotted them, and then just a really light sprinkle of sugar. You don't need much. And it gives it just a little extra sweetness to it. Scones don't have a whole lot of sugar in them. You know, they're much lighter than, say, a muffin or a cookie. So a little extra on the top adds a little bit of flavor. Here. Okay. We're gonna go pop these in the oven. These are gonna cook at 400 degrees for 18 minutes. They're going to be delicious. I feel like it's, you know, the closer and closer you get to Thanksgiving, the more and more Christmas it feels on here. So pop them in, 400 degrees. I'm gonna set my timer for 18 minutes. And now let's go pull our chicken out of our soup so it can start to cool. And then we will start dicing up our veggies to pop in there. So chicken noodle soup is one of the few soups that I do not saute my veggies up on. That's because it's a much lighter broth-based soup. But the trick for the best chicken noodle soup is you've got to use chicken with skin on it. Ideally thighs, they're higher fat in them, which gives you a more rich broth. So we're gonna pull these guys out. They've been cooking for quite a while now. And then in order to get them to be nice and cool, when we kind of peel them, we're gonna pull back their skin. Because if you leave their skin on them, it's gonna just make it it keeps them nice and hot. It's like a little sleeping bag. Okay, I'm gonna turn this down all the way to low now, so it can kind of simmer. And then we're just gonna take your tongs and just pull off that skin. That way when we go to shred them in a little bit, they won't be piping hot. So when you're making broth, definitely, I like to add the chicken breasts in there for, you know, more meat because they're a bit, you know, it's much more meat on the breast, but you've got to use those thighs. There we go. This one does not want to pull. Perfect. And then one more. There we go. So now they'll cool off. You can see how steamy they are. So I'm just going to slide this right over here for now so it can kind of cool off a little bit. And while that's doing it, let's get our veggies kind of chopped up to add into our soup. So we have one yellow onion, and you're going to use the whole onion because we're going to use a lot of these really fragrant vegetables, onions, carrots, celery. We'll also add in some leeks, but they're going to flavor up our broth. So don't skimp on them. So we'll cut it down in half. And then I'm just gonna dice it nice and small because again, I don't want a whole huge piece of onion, but more smaller bits that you can get in every spoonful. And this onion and celery, those are the two like crucial vegetables for making the really delicious broth that for the chicken noodle soup. And then we're gonna add in a few other ingredients, but let's get our onions in here. Kind of start to simmer up. And I have quite a bit of celery. So So just break them off. We gave them a big wash, but I'm gonna kind of cut off the bottom bit of each stalk here. And then I'm going to cut them right down the middle. So again, you don't have just these huge half circles of celery, but again, more little bits in every bite. Now, if you don't like to eat celery, I recommend just keep your stalks nice and big, throw them in there so that your broth will get that flavor, and then you can pull them out so you don't have the celery in your soup. But it is an essential component for making that just really delicious broth. And this is a good amount of celery. This is probably like 5 or 6 kind of full-size stalks for it. But I really love a lot of celery in mine. Especially because it's a very simple base to the soup. I mean, I just do onions, carrots, celery, leeks, and then green onions towards the end. So it's just simple. So you need a lot of those really fragrant ones to really build up on it. And keep your leaves on your celery. You don't need to pull those off. Those will add a nice fragrant flavor as well. They have just as much flavor as like the stalk. You know, it's a little bit more delicate, but it is wonderful. Okay, let's get our celery in here. I'm gonna start turning it up now that we've got the celery and the onions in, because it cools down the broth a little bit. And let's get our carrots peeled up and ready to go. So I've got about 8 carrots. Now these are pretty small, so it's probably like 5 to 6 good sized carrots. We're gonna peel off the skin, and then we will kind of cut them in half. Maybe thicker ones we'll quarter, and we'll kind of dice them up as well. So you get lots of little carrot bits in there. And cutting them smaller will allow it to cook up a lot faster as well. So give this a nice peel. And then once we get these kind of veggies in there stewing, we'll put in our noodles, because they take a minute to kind of cook up. Now, I have found that with chicken noodle soup, if you use just a plain box noodle, they always get overcooked and soggy. So if I used to always make my own, but then I found in the freezer section, they're called reams. They're frozen noodles, and they give you as if they're like that old school hand cut noodles. They taste just like the ones I make, but you don't have to waste all the time making homemade noodles for them. So that is one thing I do that gives my soup, like, it elevates it without having to do a lot of work. It's just the convenience of using that versus making your own. It's just so easy. And so that really makes a difference, because if you try to use just like a box noodle, it always gets soggy, you know, because it just sits in that broth, because it's such a, you know, a thinner base broth, and it just gets always overcooked. Okay. We're gonna cut the tops off of our carrots here. And then we'll get the bottoms off as well. And then once we get our carrots in and our noodles in, we'll add in some bay leaves and some black pepper and a little bit of chicken bouillon to kind of help with the broth flavor. And then we're gonna work on our grilled cheeses, using our leftover sourdough bread, and we'll work on our glaze for our gingerbread scones. But today just feels like a chicken noodle soup day. We've had just like this kind of torrential downpours and a lot of rain. It's a little bit dreary and cool, so chicken noodle soup. And we're gonna be out of town this weekend, so it's like, I always like to make up a big batch of some of my parents' favorite stuff when we're gone. So they'll have a good batch of this to help tide them over until I get back on Sunday. Okay. And again, I'm just doing a slightly smaller dice on them so that, you know, you just don't have super huge pieces of vegetables. It will, one, allow it to cook up a little bit faster, but it just prevents getting a giant carrot or a giant piece of celery. Gives you more veggies in every bite, but not being overwhelmed with them. just kind of a loose dice here. And we'll throw those in there. Okay. We'll get this cooking up. And then we'll get our noodles in and our bay leaf and some black pepper in. Now we'll add our leeks in a little bit. I don't add my leeks in too early because if you do, they will cook up like almost like a green onion, and so they'll get mushy or overcooked. So I like to put them towards the end to add that really rich onion flavor, and then even later I'll add in some more green onions. Okay, since we have a good size bowl, I'm gonna do 3 bay leaves in here. And then we're gonna use, I always use a good amount of black pepper in my chicken noodle soup. I just really like the kick, so we're gonna use like a whole teaspoon. Most of the time when I make soups, I use just about a half a teaspoon, but the black pepper just adds a little something extra to the broth. We'll give this a nice mix. And then we're gonna put our frozen noodles in, because these take a little bit to cook up to get nice and soft and tender on it. But you just keep them in their freezer and they're just like an old school, like homemade noodle. And I'm gonna use a whole bag. And this is like their 12-ounce bag. We'll give this a good stir. And then we're gonna add in about a heaping tablespoon of chicken bouillon. And this just gives our chicken broth a little extra flavor, kind of helps it there. When we cooked up our chicken, we used some salted water in there as well, but this gives it a bit more.
You want to let people know about the streaming this weekend?
Yes, so we will be out of town for a soccer tournament. So we will stream lunch tomorrow, but then we won't get back until Sunday night, but then we'll stream Sunday night because we got to start prepping up for all the family that's coming in town. Perfect. I'm gonna bring my chicken over here as it continues to cool. We'll start shredding that in a little bit, but let's get our blanking on my grilled cheese. There we go. Let's get our grilled cheese cooking up, because what is better than grilled cheese dipped into a chicken noodle soup? I'm a person who has to have like a grilled cheese of some sort with soup. It's just the perfect combination. So we'll slide this over here. We've got some of our leftover bread last night, and we're just doing a good old classic grilled cheese with cheddar cheese.
Yeah, a question. How long does the bouillon stay in the fridge once it's open?
They pretty much last, because there's such a high salt content, that they can last a couple months. Mine never have the opportunity to last that long, so I don't know if there's like a definitive, because I typically use up a whole container with at least in a month, in a couple weeks, because I use it a lot in cooking. So, but I think on there, it can last at least a month or whatnot for it. There, you just always just check, you always want to check to make sure there's no mold growth, because even if something is still within the good time frame, if you left it out or it got contaminated, then it won't be good. So you just got to, keep an eye on it. But that salt content in it does allow it to stay kind of preserved and last a lot longer. Kind of similar to how ketchup is in your fridge forever. Unless you have young children, then they go through ketchup so fast. Okay, we've got our slices here. And these are gonna make, I mean, I'm making 2 really big sandwiches, but they're actually gonna feed. There'll be enough for, each sandwich is enough to feed 2 people because they are pretty hefty. I'll get one more out of this. Especially because I did a round loaf, and a lot of times I do my oval loaf so that I can get a nice, it's not as long of a strip for it. Okay, let's get our skillet starting to warm up here. And then just take your prettiest side of each one, and we're gonna rub a little bit of room temperature butter on it. This is going to allow it to crisp up and get that nice kind of crunch to it. And put this here. And the butter is the crucial part. You don't want to just try to toast it up, then you don't get that nice, delicious kind of crunch to it. And then I'm going to place it on my skillet. I'm warming it up, but then we'll kind of bring the temperature down to cook.
2 questions. First question, for your sourdough, are you still doing a loaf and a half when you make it?
Yes, I still do my kind of my big loaf because the smaller loaves just weren't keeping up with our family.
And second question, do you know what you're making for dinner yet?
I am not 100% sure, but I know my proteins are either going to be ground pork or a picnic roast. So I'm leaning towards using the picnic roast, but I haven't decided definitively what I'm going to do with it. We'll see what inspiration hits me for it. And then we'll figure it out from there. So I'm going to take my sharp cheddar cheese, and since this is just going to be a grilled cheese ones, I'm going to actually do a little bit more on it than when I would do with if I had it like a meat or something like that. And I will say, I might be the, very controversial, I do not like American cheese. So my grilled cheeses and my kids have only ever had cheddar cheese or bougie cheeses on it because I do not like American cheese at all. Even if I go to a restaurant and they ask what burger, it's always cheddar or something else, but never American. It's too creamy. Okay, we've got all of that. That should be good. So we've got our good base on here. We're gonna let these guys kind of toast up and working on it. I'm gonna bring it down to about a 6. I like to do my sourdoughs when I'm making my grilled cheeses, I do them in steps so that they don't get over, like, you melt the cheese up kind of light brown, and then the second flip on each side gives you that nice toasty edges on it. So let's get it. Okay, let's see if our chicken, okay, this should be good to work with. Let me see before I get my hands in here. I'm gonna wait on this because my gingerbread scones are about to come out here in a minute, and I don't want to be caught in the middle of this. So let's get our leeks. We can prep up our leeks to add in here in just a second for it. So for a leek, leeks are kind of dirty, so you always want to give them a really good rinse before you pop it in. What we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of cut it right down the middle here. And although this one looks fairly clean, I'm still gonna dice it up and give it a really good rinse because I find that it is often full of sand.
Do you make your own bread?
I do make my own bread. I make my own sourdough loaves all the time. I have several yeast loaves that I make. So I do make my own bread, except the only things is that just like that cheap sandwich bread, on there, that like honey wheat. I don't make that, but I keep saying, I'm like, oh, I need to just tweak my recipe and get it there because I always use that for making like my panades and my meatballs. So that's one of my things I'm gonna work into figuring out how to tweak my recipe to make it that perfect. Okay, before we give these a rinse, let's go get our gingerbread scones out of the oven so they can sit and cool, and then we'll shred our chicken, we'll make up our glaze to go over our scones. It looks like, where did we'll just use, we've got some Pred's Mint, and I've got a random cat paw today. Let's get this off. Look at our gorgeous scones. You can see how much they grew in size, which is why we stretched them out. They've got so many layers that they actually popped over a little bit, but they'll be lovely and flaky. With these, before we glaze them, they need to cool. Otherwise, your glaze will run off, and if you want that nice kind of quintessential white glaze on it, for it. Oh, there's my oven mitts. I knew they were around here somewhere. You know, sometimes Jack runs off with my oven mitts, so, you know, it's hard to know. But here are my sourdough gingerbread scones. We have molasses, brown sugar in it, ginger, cinnamon, cloves. You can see these kind of flaky layers. They kind of puffed up when we put them over there. But they are going to be so delicious. We're gonna drizzle them with a lovely vanilla glaze when they've cooled off in just a second. And it'll be a nice little perfect treat. Let's give this flip, start kind of warming it up and getting it ready on the other side. I'm gonna rotate just a little bit. And turn it down to about a 4. Since I want it with sourdough, like with grilled cheeses using sourdough bread, go low and slow because it takes a while for your sourdough bread to heat up. I'm gonna take my leeks here. We're just gonna give them a quick rinse. Just toss them with your hands through the water. Kind of help separate them and just get out any bit of loose sand. These were actually surprisingly clean leeks, which I don't often get. It was a really small one, so I think that might have been why.
How hard is it to make your sourdough?
It is pretty darn easy. I have both recipe cards on how to make your starter and videos from start to beginning, especially if you don't know like what to do. It's really easy. And then I have also how to make your own starter for it. So it is not a difficult thing to do. You just have to, once you know the terminology and once you've done it one time, it's really easy. Actually, even we made like a joke video a while back where we had Teddy make one. Teddy, Chef Teddy, I think he was 3 at the time, but he may have been 4. But he was able to whip together a sourdough with no help on our own, and his actually turned up and baked out really well. And his was not precise. So it's not difficult for it to kind of turn out, especially once you figure out what like to laminate or stretch and fold means. Once you get those terms figured out, it's really easy. And I do have those videos, so you can kind of go back and look through it. I think we have like a little playlist, a sourdough playlist for that. Okay, I'm gonna shred up our chicken here. So I pulled off my skins on it so that you know, they'd be cool enough for me to shred. Now, it might be hot for some people, but my hands are like, can handle lava here. So we're gonna just start pulling off in the big chunks. Now you could save, you don't have to put all of this chicken in there if you want. You could definitely save some for another day because I did cook up a lot. Because I like to use a good amount in there so that I can get enough of that like richness in my broth. So I'm gonna probably save a little bit to kind of go maybe for a recipe another day that I need shredded chicken for. Because this is a lot of chicken to put in here for this, you know, little pot of chicken noodle soup. But I wanted it to flavor up the broth. So thinking about like Thanksgiving, if you have like leftover turkey or turkey carcasses, boil them up in a pot to make like a nice stock, and you can have a great like turkey noodle soup. Get some of this dark meat in there. And then we'll flip our sourdoughs again in just a second. And then we're gonna make our glaze. We'll throw in our leeks here in just a minute. And then we'll be kind of on the final little rundown of everything. You see how just these, it was just 2 breasts, you know, with the skin on, and then 4 thighs, but it is a lot of chicken here. And the difference between, so I use and I always use skin on. So don't get the ones without skin, because that skin is gonna give you a better flavor broth. But the main difference between, you know, the thighs and the breast meat give you more meat, but it's a drier one in the sense that it will kind of fall apart more in your soup, while your darker meat, the thighs, will hold together in the soup a little bit better. Okay. So we have that. I'm gonna go wash my hands. We'll give our sourdough a flip. We'll add our leeks in. We'll make our glaze. Okay, let's get these guys flipped over for their kind of final toasting up on each side. Do a rotate here. We're gonna add our leeks in. This is just one kind of small leek. And that leek is gonna add, again, just another onion, like herbally kind of flavor to it. The broth, which is just going to be absolutely lovely. And then we'll add our chicken in, but I don't add my chicken in until right towards the end, because you don't wanna overcook your chicken in there, especially after you shred it, because it will fall apart. We've got our grilled cheese almost there. We're getting close. Let's get our glaze whipped up and together. I'm going to turn this down just a smidge. For our glaze, we are going to just make a really simple, basic vanilla glaze to go over these. I'm going to start with about 2 tablespoons of heavy cream. We're going to add in about a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Hardly any left. I'll grab my whisk. And then we're going to add enough powdered sugar to get you to that nice kind of thicker consistency. I'm going to go a little bit thicker than I normally do for a glaze, because I want it to be a little bit kind of stronger in that kind of color and thickness, because, you know, with gingerbread you're used to that thick white frosting on it. So we're going to add in, I've got about a 1/2 cup of powdered sugar in here right now. We're gonna whisk it together, then we'll add a little bit more. But just go little by little until you hit it right. You don't wanna have to keep adding liquid to get it, you know. We'll do a little bit more. And then just make sure your scones are cooled down a little bit. Don't drizzle them as soon as they get out of the oven, or you're gonna have it be, there we go, this is a pretty good thickness to it. You're gonna have it just run right off. Okay, let's check out our grilled cheeses here. Doing good. Beautiful. I'm going to turn this down just a smidge. Give it a good stir. Then we're going to drizzle our scones. We'll put our chicken in, and then last our green onions, and we'll be ready to serve up. Okay. Beautiful. So I'm going to drizzle. If you want to, you can kind of put it in a bag to pipe it over. For it. Let's see, I might actually do that, because it's a little thing. Just get it in a little, let me grab a Ziploc baggie and pipe it over. That way it will come out a little bit nicer, because you want it thicker, you don't want it too thin, or it will just run off. I was hoping it would drizzle a little bit nicer, but we'll make it look bougie. So you don't have to have a frosting like pastry bag. I used to always use Ziploc baggies before I bought a bunch of pastry bags. And since this is a small amount, I'm just gonna use a Ziploc baggie. So just kind of put it in here, put it in one corner. Squeeze it down, and then you're just gonna snip off the edge, and then we can drizzle this over, and it will give you a nice little thing. Okay. There we go. Much prettier. So here are our sourdough gingerbread scones. We use brown sugar, molasses, ginger, cinnamon, and a little bit of cloves in here to give you those just nice kind of flavors to it. But you see how you've got this nice kind of thickness to it so that it really drizzles over nicely, gives you that fun little gingerbread look. And we'll squeeze our last little bit over here. These are the not so pretty ones. Okay. Put these guys, we're gonna pop our chicken in. Beautiful. And we'll be ready to serve up here in just a second. Okay. So again, I'm not gonna use all of my chicken because this is a lot of chicken in here. But we're gonna use kind of half it up. That way I have enough to use for another soup or a day. But you wanna cook it up to get that really lush broth for your chicken noodle soup. Give this a nice little toss here. You can see you've got this just lovely big chunks of chicken in here. It just makes it wonderful. And then we're gonna just finish it with some cut green onions for, again, just this nice little extra pop of fresh onion flavor at the very end. And I always like to do it right kind of before because it keeps it really vibrant. These guys in there, we'll give it a nice serve, and then we will be ready to serve up our dinner, our lunch today. Okay. Do a nice little stir around. Beautiful. Okay, let me move this out of the way, and then we're gonna serve up our lunch. On here so we can cut our grilled cheeses. I'm gonna slide our first one over here, that way we have a little bit of space. And we'll get our bowls. Okay. For lunch today, we have our homemade chicken noodle soup with a rich, delicious broth made from cooking up chicken thighs and breasts. We added onions, celery, carrots, and then these nice kind of frozen style noodles. We added our shredded up chicken in there, and then there's leeks and fresh green onions to give a little extra pop of that nice, aromatic onion flavor to it at the end. But just a delicious, simple thing. And we're gonna serve that with our grilled cheeses on our homemade sourdough bread on here. So we've got quite the stack here on there. And that sourdough bread with the sharp cheddar cheese is just gonna give you that really lovely pop of flavor. And then of course, to have a nice little sweet treat at the end, we've got our sourdough gingerbread scones with our vanilla glaze on the top. Well guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page, so if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to that link, search for what we made. So we've got our chicken noodle soup and our gingerbread scones, and you can watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my Hexclad griddle pan in there, my Le Creuset, my cutting boards, knives, all the different things I use in the kitchen for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us.